while everyone is getting settled, we can get started. We've now reached the point in the semester where we can get started at Hofstra daylight time. I hope everybody is well rested and hasn't lost too much sleep. So the game plan for today, we will finish up case materials that will be comprised mostly of citators. You've all seen this before. We'll be talking about shepherdizing and key citing cases, so it's going to be somewhat of a review. I will be pointing out tools that you may or may not know about to help you not only with your updating, but also using citators for research purposes. We'll take a look at other sorts of case materials, dockets, transcripts, etc. And then what we will do is a revised version of last week's workshop, which we didn't get through. I thought a lot about it, and so what we will try is to review our issue spotting and then take it from there. But after we're done with the case materials, then we'll dive into that, and I'll go into more detail just before that. And then after that, we're going to take a look at forms. I will push off to next week a couple of the other materials that are listed on the syllabus, jury instructions, jury verdicts, and court rules. I do promise we will get to it, but that will be next week, so we can do our extra workshop today. And then at the end of class, I will be distributing assignment 4. It will be due after spring break, so you will have an extra week, although I know, yes, it's right after spring break. So for those of you who don't mind doing things a little bit ahead, you can get that done and over with. Okay, any questions before we dive into citators? So, of course, this is the ultimate updating, as you've all heard and talked about and hopefully done plenty of shepherdizing and key citing. And they are pretty much synonymous. One on one system, one on the other. And they are essentially citators. Have you used that term citator, or are you just used to talking about shepherdizing and key citing? Who can explain what a citator is if you're familiar with it? And no, not a trick question. I keep on trying to convince you all I don't do trick questions. Some of you still don't believe me, but we'll see what I can do. No takers on the citator? Okay, so what I have up here is Google Scholar. We've looked at Google Scholar for cases, and I pulled up a case called Rush Prudential, as you can see, just plugging in the citation. And Google Scholar, in addition to giving us access to cases for free, allowing us to do the wonderful Google search with keyword searching with cases, it gives us a how cited. And what Google Scholar tells us in how cited is sort of what it sounds like, how your case was cited in other cases. But it's not really how, it's more of a where cited. So I have a beef with Google on that because I think they've used the wrong term. Because basically all Google is telling us is where Rush Prudential is cited. It doesn't tell us how it was cited. In other words, how it was treated by all of these subsequent cases. And that's the main difference you will find between Google and the free citators, and we'll take a look at really just one other, and the premium Lexis Shepherds and Westlaw key cite. Lexis and Westlaw are going to tell us how cases treat our case. And that's the key, of course, for updating, because again, we're in the common law system and we want to see how later cases treat our case. Everybody clear on the generic citator versus the premium Lexis Westlaw and the good, free, but not nearly as good Google Scholar. And as I said, we'll see another one for specifically for New York in just a little bit. Signed me out. Okay, that's all right. So let's go to Rush Prudential here. One of the reasons I'm choosing Rush Prudential to look at instead of Aetna, which we've been looking at, actually, I'm going to go to Lexis first. This is the problem with Lexis. Is Rush Prudential has a couple of features that will be interesting to explore. Apologies here for, I thought it let me hang on there for a little while longer. Okay, so good thing I chose a case with an easy citation to type. I'm just going to copy that because I'm going to have to put that in a couple more times. So you're all familiar with the concept with either using keysight or shepherd, right? You get the signals, and that's a red stop sign, and if you highlighted warning, negative treatment. I guess you all don't get the warning Will Robinson from Lost in Space. That's way before all of your times. Actually, believe it or not, even before my time. All right, too bad. So warning, we want to check this because there's negative treatment indicated, and Lexis is great. It tells us what all these different symbols mean, and so our case, we now see warning, and we're going to want to check that. What Shepard's also does for us is it lets us know what happened to our particular case, our litigation. And what it's telling us here for Rush Prudential is there's no subsequent appellate history, but there's prior history. Anybody know what Lexis means by subsequent appellate history? Alrighty, so let's take a look at another case which does have subsequent appellate history so you can see what it is. And this happens to be a case that is now before the Supreme Court. So it definitely has subsequent appellate history. Of course, I'm typing in the Court of Appeals site. And you can see subsequent appellate history contains possible negative analysis. So we'll click on that so you can see what it is rather than my explaining. Basically, what it's telling you is that your case in that particular litigation, later things have happened since the citation you typed in. So in our case, I typed in 790 F3D 563. Here's 598, so it was modified, a motion was granted, and a stay was denied. Here's another stay denied. A writ of cert was granted. As I mentioned, it's now before the Supreme Court. So stuff has happened in this litigation, to put it non-technically, although I still think stuff could be a technical word. So that's the subsequent appellate history. But let's go back to Rush, because that's where we're going to spend most of our time with regard to citators. And let's just properly Shepardize this document so we can explore the features, the different tools for our toolbox. Yes, that theme is coming back. So prior history, same idea within the litigation of Rush, Prudential v. Moran. Now, cases may get combined, and I'm sure you've seen that a lot and remember that, trying to figure all that out in Civ Pro. So here's a bunch of prior cases that ultimately culminated in the case that I typed in, which in the Rush v. Moran case is actually a Supreme Court case. So we find out what happened to this particular case as it proceeded in the courts before we got to it, before our citation, and anything that might have happened after. And you see those particular cases, what each signal is for each of those cases. But the meat, if you will, sorry if there are any vegetarians in the room, the meat of Shepard's is the citing decisions. And again, we see our warning signal there, that red stop sign. What would be the vegetarian equivalent of that expression? Sorry. All right, when you think of it, let me know. So the meat and vegetarian equivalent would be the analysis, of course. So we already know, warning, it was overruled in part by one case, and of course, if we click on that, we would get to that case. Now remember, even when you see the red signal, of course you must check it, but it may not be that your case is not good law for the issue you're relying on. It was overruled in part. Maybe the part that you're relying on isn't the part that was overruled. And that can frequently be the case, that a particular case is questioned for one aspect or issue, but not for the others. So always look at that. We see it was also questioned, so we can see the various treatments that Shepard's is providing for us. So we see question, caution, positive, followed. So if you wanted to see other, and here's where the research component comes in with these treatments. Because in addition to updating, seeing the negative, seeing the question, you can also see other cases that discuss your case. If your case is a great case, but maybe you want a more recent one, you can take a look at those that followed your case. You can do any combination with the multiple. Again, all of these research. You can limit by court. Again, these are all the filters we've been talking about a long time. I'm going to zoom through unless there are questions, and don't hesitate to stop me if you are confused. But as we've seen this set up before, and now we have the depth of discussion. So a case that's discussed a lot gets 4 bars, and there are 40 of those. Again, somewhat discussed, and you can only mentioned and merely cited, and you can select and narrow by any multiple. So there are a whole number of ways of slicing and dicing. I guess we've got a food metaphor going today. I hope no one's too hungry. And, as they say, or used to say on the late night TV shows, I think I've already asked you about that, but wait, there's more, and the best part, the head notes. If you have determined in your case, what are we've talked about looking at the good head notes. So you know, hey, head note number 3 in Rush is the one I'm really interested in. And in looking at the Shepherds for Rush, she's like, what were the head notes again? I don't remember what head note number 3 was. Lexis is very nice to us. It lets us know head note number 3 covers insurance law, federal regulations, ERISA, general overview. So if I think that's a great head note, the issue that was discussed in Rush, that was covered by head note number 3, I can now find 186, other cases that discuss Rush for that particular point of law. Do you see how powerful that could be once you find that good case? Remember the one good case strategy we talked about last time. You shepherdize that good case, and you figure out which head notes you like and highlight it if you don't remember which head note's which, and say, hey, look, I can find more good cases. And of course, you've got all the other filters, so I can narrow it down to New York if I want, or the Second Circuit. I can only get those that are analyzed, so discussed a lot, as opposed to merely cited or some combination. I still have my search within results. So if there's a particular term search, if I really want to narrow, say, to preemption or denial of care, I have my search within results. So just so you can see, so if I want to narrow by head note, say, I'm going to select multiple, If I know I've already looked at Rush and I've decided I really like the issue, or the issue number 10 is really relevant, head note number 10 is really relevant, and the issue in head note number 13, and you'll notice they're not in numerical order, but which is kind of weird. They're in a number of cases. I don't find that particularly intuitive, but you can figure it out easily enough. So here are cases that discuss Rush having to do with those particular head notes. And now we haven't looked into each particular case. And you can see how each case, some people get a little confused because they start to see all these symbols. But you can see that this case has cases that questioned it. So the Metro Life Insurance case have subsequent cases that questioned it. Up here, this first case, Conkrite, does have some negative warnings. So as you learn these new cases, you want to be wary of how you're going to rely or not upon those. And again, Shepherds gives you that information. Any questions about that? Again, I'm not going to click through all the filters because we've done that, and I think you all have the hang of that pretty well. Not that it's that difficult. Another aspect of Shepherds that's some people find useful, I think if you are more visually oriented, is you can view all this information in a grid. I'm more word oriented, so this doesn't help me particularly, but the point of that being that if it helps you, great. If it doesn't help you, don't bother with it. So we can see the different cases and their different treatments and the different courts. And if we like one particular intersection, so we're probably interested in the Second Circuit, and I want to see those, or the one case that's cautioned within the Second Circuit, I can go to the grid this way. It's just a different way to access and to narrow and slice and dice, as we have been saying, the same information. We also have other citing sources in Shepard's, again, to help us with that research function, or providing us that research function of the citator. It's basically giving us citations to materials, to resources other than decisions. So we want some extra explanation. Shepard's is actually one great way to find secondary sources. So say you ran across the Aetna case and you're just really not sure how it's going to apply to everything. You could Shepardize Aetna and see some explanation. And once again, we have our filters. This time, of course, the content filters are going to be quite different because we're talking about secondary sources and not cases with headnotes, but we still have search within results, so I can still search for denial of care, preemption, whatever terms are useful to me. And I can, if I decide I really just want to look at law reviews because I want more detailed discussion or treatises, so you can limit by that as well. Questions? Is this somewhat review? Have you seen this before? I'm sure you've seen Shepard's before. Okay. There is also, shouldn't leave out, table of authorities. This is a good way to see what cases were cited in Rush v. Moran. So also not a bad way. See what cases the court relied on or perhaps didn't rely on. You'd have to read in the context of Rush v. Moran to see how the court discussed the case. But here's the listing of those cases again to help you find additional cases. And again, we've already talked about the annotated code helping us to find cases, but it's always worth repeating because the annotated code is our very best friend when we're dealing with a statutory section. And the one aspect I like to point out about Shepardizing an annotated code. So, of course, we will find, remember, we will find cases that cite to our code section, which is different than our notes of decision, or case analysis, or case notes, whatever they're calling it these days. The citing are just cases that cite. They mention it. The notes of decisions will tell us what that case talks about in terms of topic. We talked a lot about this when we talked about the annotated code. The other thing Shepard's will do for us, in addition to giving us the citing cases, those cases that just cite to section 1144, is Shepard's. And Shepard's, I believe, is still unique in this. So we won't see this in KeyCite. And that is if you have a particularly complex statutory scheme. So you have a statute section with lots of subsections. You tax people, you've probably run into this a lot, right? You have a tax code section and there are a bazillion subsections within that particular tax code section? No? Yes? Okay. Well, here's an 1144 isn't that complex a section, but it's got a few subsections. And it could be that you are interested in just a particular subsection of a statute rather than the entire statutory section. Shepard's, unlike this, as I mentioned, is still unique in Shepardizing, telling you cases that cite to that particular subsection of your statutory section. So I clicked on that link, subsections, that was up top. And you can see here, I'll go back and show it to you again. You can see I've got a case, I've got actually 11 cases that cite to, not only cite to section 1144, but they cite to section 1144, subsection B, subsection 6, subsection capital A, subsection little I. So really specific, in other words. I guess this one must be highly litigated because there are actually 11 cases that cite to that just one subsection. And then you can see the various breakdowns of the other subsections. Some are not quite that detailed, or granular, I guess might be the word. And then you see some just cite to the statutory scheme, 1144 and following at SEC, remember, or just 1144. So nice trick, nice tool to remember on Shepard's if you can, if you're dealing with a statutory section and if you're only interested in that subsection. And here's the link that got me there, subsection reports by specific court citation, which honestly doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but if you can remember to look for the word subsection, you should be good. Everybody follow what this does? I'll take silence as a yes. Okay. I'm ready to move on to Westlaw, unless there are questions about Shepard's on Lexis. There we go. So there's Rush Prudential. Looks a lot different than Shepard's. We do have our signal, and of course our flags are our key site signals. And now note something interesting, which is one reason why I like to use Rush Prudential. We have a yellow flag rather than a red one. Westlaw's signal system's a little simpler. They just use flags and a whole bunch of different shapes, and their color system is pretty intuitive, red, yellow, and then pretty much like a letter symbol. So interestingly, Shepard's and Keysight treat Rush or interpret the treatment of Rush slightly different. What does that mean? It means that if you can, and you've got a critical case, and you might want to check both just to get a sense, but both are equally respected citators. So pretty much you just want to do a thorough job of checking whatever it is the system you're using tells you, whether it's a red symbol or a yellow symbol. And I guess the other thing it tells you is don't overlook yellow symbols just because, it's yellow, there's so many yellow, I don't need to check it. It could be actually red. There's a famous story, I think Westlaw has probably changed it. For a very long time, Westlaw gave basically the equivalent of a yellow symbol to, if you ever looked up Plessy versus Ferguson on Westlaw, it would have a yellow symbol. You know, we long know we got overruled by Brown versus Board of Ed. Well, Westlaw gave it a yellow symbol because it technically doesn't overrule. It sort of disagrees. I mean, it doesn't use the word overrule. There are all sorts of technicalities. I think they probably changed it over because people like me were telling the story so much, and it didn't look that good. But the point being is that there can be interpretations for all sorts of reasons that really aren't worth worrying about. Just make sure you check when you see the yellow. So there are any number of ways of doing that. Westlaw lays it out in the tabs. Again, we have our history, what happened to this particular litigation. And actually, I really like this on Keysight Westlaw. It gives you this little map. And as I said, I'm not really a picture person, I'm more of a word person, but for me, I always got confused in how cases went up and down in the courts and trying to figure that out from as it was described, if at all, in the decision. I always had a hard time. And here's this nice little map. I know it's really little, you can't read the words, but basically here's trial court, appellate court, highest court, in our case, the Supreme Court, and you can get a sense just from the boxes and the arrows how it goes. If we take a quick look at our other case, the one that's currently in the Supreme Court, so that will look quite a bit more involved, as I'm sure you can imagine. So if we go to that nice history grid, you can get a nice sense of where it started, and then it went up, and I realize you can't read it. You can actually make it bigger in any number of ways. So we see a granting stay-in part and vacating, and you can kind of, when you're looking at it on your screen, you can get a sense of how it all looks and works and what happened to that particular case in litigation. So the history tab can be very helpful in helping you understand the path of your case. No, that's not what we want. So back here, Rush Prudential. Of course, we do need to update, so we need to check that negative treatment. And you can see that the scheme, the organization on Keysight is quite different from Shepard's. Everybody has their preference. Again, there's no one that's better. They just do it differently. So you can get straight to that negative treatment because, frankly, that's most of the reason most people are using Citators is to update, to make sure their case is still good law or see what happened to it. And so here we can see those cases that negatively treated Rush, and we can see what court they came from. I'm in the way here. Okay. What court they came from. And then you can click in and see how they talked about Rush Prudential. So here's a district court case talking about Rush Prudential. So I know a district court case can't overrule, but it can recognize an overruling as the treatment suggests. Bless you. And we see the similar descriptions of how our case is treated. Again, this is the depth of treatment, how much our case was discussed, and the different head notes. And again, these are Westlaw head notes, not Lexis head notes. Shepard's talks about Lexis head notes. Coke and Pepsi, they don't share their formulas. They don't share their head notes. But just like Lexis does, Westlaw, if you hover over the head note link, you can see what head note it's talking about. Any questions about negative treatment or history? Once again, the citing references, the meat and vegetable equivalent of where our updating and research components of Keysight will be. Again, it looks different, but pretty much does the same thing in that it will tell us the different types of documents that cite. Again, just mention our case, maybe a whole lot. We'll see 4 bars of depth, or maybe not a great deal, so we'd only see 1 bar of depth, if any. We can narrow by types of resources, so typically at least we'd want to start with cases. Again, to see whether a case is good law using the updating function as well as the research function. And pretty much names have been changed, but the concept is the same. You can limit by a whole bunch of great stuff with the filters. You can do a search within results. You can limit jurisdiction, you can limit that depth of treatment. And again, you can limit by head note. Here we find out that the head notes that are used come either under the insurance or the state's topic. If you want to get more specific than the broad topic, which I think is probably, if you're going to use this head note limiting, you probably do want to be more specific, then you want to click on specify, and you can see which different insurance head notes are discussed in Rush, and if you decide you like that particular head note, you can check it or uncheck it as makes sense for you. And so scanning through healthcare benefits, that seems pretty good, so we might just keep that one. And he also talks about that. I might just get rid of or keep. And I can do the same or not with states as well. And this then tells Westlaw, okay, limit my citing references for cases results to those head notes that I have specified. And with whatever other limits I've pointed out in my filters or checked up in my filters, I apply them. And Westlaw does its thing, and voila, we have our results of different cases that meet our specification for head notes, so for topic, and whatever other filters we've applied. Just as we saw with Shepard's, we can also use that research component for a citator to find other secondary sources. So again, if we decide, I really just don't understand how rush applies to our whole preemption thing, I need some more explanation. I might go to secondary sources, wait for Westlaw to load them, all 748 of them. And I might then narrow for preemption or just scan through, depends on my results, depends on what I want. Again, I can, by narrow by preemption, I mean search within results. One thing I neglected to mention on Lexis, that is there, and I will point it out here on Westlaw, are here it's a bell, on Lexis it's a little alarm clock, and basically you can set up an alert. So if there's a case you are following, like if you're really interested in that Supreme Court case that I pointed out that's before the Supreme Court now, you could set up an alert and you'll get an email from Lexis or Westlaw, whichever service you set it up on, letting you know when something has happened. Now, U.S. Supreme Court, that probably isn't that useful because you'll see it in the news, especially this particular case. But if there are other cases you're following that you want to see if anything happens, these alerts can be very useful. And just as we discussed on Lexis, of course, there are notes of decisions in our best friend, the annotated code on Westlaw. And again, remember the distinction between notes of decision and citing references. So we've got a whole lot of notes of decisions. We've got just under 2,000. If we go to citing references, now not all 31,000 are cases, but you can see 8,000 of them are cases. So you see the difference, because I know a lot of people had questions about that when we talked about the annotated code. So this is just review. Again, citing references just cite to the statute section. They don't discuss it. The notes of decisions are where you're going to want to look for interpretation of your section with all the different topics that we looked at. Let's go ahead and look at citing references. Actually, I'm not sure that that was entirely necessary because we pretty much discussed everything worth talking about with regard to finding cases using Shepard's and KeyCite, obviously on Westlaw KeyCite. Any questions? Okay. Our good friend Bloomberg, I know how much you all love Bloomberg, also has its own citator that also does the same thing in terms of telling us how a case is cited, not just where. So here's Rush Prudential. I have no idea how long it's going to last or how many times we're going to have to reload. I know you're tired of hearing this, so am I, frankly. We are working on it and still in contact with the university and trying to get servers to talk to each other. It's just taking longer than I would have hoped. So moral of that story is when you need to use Bloomberg, do it at home. Because I think you don't run into trouble at home, right? That's correct, right? Anybody run into trouble at home? Let's phrase that as yeah, well, but do you run into that reload error DNS error page? Yeah, it is slow. It's slow for me at home too. That is Bloomberg. I don't think that's out of the ordinary. Okay, so we see here Bloomberg calls it citator bcite. And we see its analysis, we see the direct history, or prior history. We see the case analysis, how many cases positive, distinguished, negative. Bloomberg's even more simplified than KeyCite and certainly Shepard's. And basically works kind of the same way, tabs kind of like Westlaw. I have a sneaking suspicion if I click on this, it's either going to log me out. Oh, look at that. Now it gets it because I was predicting. Serves me right. So you can see again, same concept applies. You can filter by analysis. You can scroll down and filter by the other factors as well. The court, the citation frequency, and even you filter here by the judge. Bloomberg does not have a search within results, however. One of the great downsides, in my opinion, amongst others that we've already just discussed. So Bloomberg will do the deed for updating, as well as providing us with possibilities for helping us with our research. It doesn't really have that wonderful headnote function, so if you do find a good headnote, and you wouldn't find a good headnote, be able to see other cases that have cited your case using that headnote. So that also is a downside. One thing Bloomberg does have, actually, that you might not realize is the citing documents, just like we saw secondary sources on Westlaw and other citing sources on Shepard's, on Lexis. Hopefully we'll get there. We'll see secondary sources on Bloomberg, if we can get there, that cite to Rush Prudential. So it might give us some more background. Any questions? I hate to always give up on Bloomberg. There we go. See, it does work eventually. Have to be patient. Not one of my strong points. So again, you see all these portfolios, and that's what Bloomberg's known for. Well, BNA Bloomberg now is known for. So all of these cite to Rush Prudential, and some of them might be quite useful with regard to helping explain it. Okay. So that's our relatively quick run through citators. Quick not because they are not important, they are extraordinarily important. Quick because I think you've probably seen most of this already. It's not too much of a repeat. I'm not sure how much you would have investigated the head notes. I think that's probably the best tool for your toolbox in terms of research. I know you talked lots about updating cases in legal writing and perhaps other classes, so that certainly is not as new. Okay, they're not questions. We will move forward with case materials, and one aspect of case materials are where can we find case opinions, decisions for free. We already have one great answer, of course, and that would be Google Scholar. So we've already investigated that. We've done a little bit of searching. If you just, again, need the opinion and don't need all the bells and whistles of headnotes and just want to read it or just want to do a quick search to see, get you started, great source. There are a couple of other resources for court opinions. I would probably just start with Google Scholar because, like you, I do like Google. But if I did not find it there, I might try a couple of other sites, and these sites are in our class web links under the cases folder. I might try FindLaw. We've seen FindLaw before, another what's known as a legal portal. I've gone specifically to FindLaw for legal professionals. That's us. There is a FindLaw for consumers. You can give that a try, but honestly, this is geared more toward what you would want if you are indeed trying to find cases in a particular jurisdiction on a particular legal topic. As you can see, the search mechanism, the search flexibility is not nearly what it is even on Google Scholar. Forget about Lexis and Westlaw. But for quick access to cases, not bad. And as you can also actually do a full text search. I don't know that I would rely or spend too much time on that, honestly. And as we can see, again, we want to be bibliographically aware. This is an opinion summary search, so it's not searching the full text. Any questions? Another legal portal that we've talked about, Legal Information Institute. In terms of which is better, it just depends what you're more comfortable with. Again, I'm not sure how often I would go to either of these sites as opposed to Google Scholar if I'm either looking for a particular case or just want to do a quick and dirty word search. I still think I would go to Google Scholar. I would probably more frequently, and again, this is personal, I would more frequently come to Legal Information Institute because I know, and I'm now relaying to you what Legal Information Institute will do for us. Actually, to go back to their home page, is it will give us link to this court the court's websites, as opposed to FindLaw, which is giving us access to FindLaw's version of the opinions, which is, again, fine for quick and dirty. If I, for whatever reason, want to go to the court website, because I know it, and now you do too, I would just go to Legal Information Institute and navigate my way through. Or, yes, the other thing I would do is if I were looking for the appellate division in New York, I might just Google that as well. And the reason I would want to go to a couple of different reasons I would want to go to particular state court. One is to get their opinions. So again, you just have to navigate through to get to New York, and as you will see, I can go directly to decisions, or I can go to the home page for the Unified Court System, which is what it's known as here in New York. And that decision, so it will link me directly to the decisions of these particular courts. So we're going to take a look at the second department. It jumps us to the second department's listing of cases as of March 2016. And then obviously I can navigate back at least to 2003. The other link on Legal Information Institute would bring me to this other site that we've seen before. And let's use that link instead. The Unified Court System. And here we see sort of the general overall New York courts. And that would be one other way to either access opinions or other case materials. And the other site I'll point out, which again we have been to before, is the New York Reporting Bureau. Again, I'm just going back to the class website, and we saw this last time as we started to talk about how decisions are reported. These are their official reports in New York. See that reference again to slip opinions. So this would be another way to find New York cases. There's a nice advanced search, which we just saw, so I could do if I had the citation. Again, this is going to be more for more recent cases. And the other kind of neat thing about this site, which is why I like to go here, is they do have a very rudimentary citation service or Citator. Again, it will tell you how your case has been cited. It won't really tell you, let me rephrase that, it will tell you where your case has been cited, not how. So those are some free sources. We've already referred to them one way or the other, but that's all of them together. Again, use free sources just to get started, even if I do have to do a very thorough research just to see if I can find my one good case pretty easily and quickly, and sometimes that works great, sometimes not so great. Or again, if I have the case site or just need to do some quick and dirty research and don't want to spend the resources if indeed the case reports are outside of my Lexis or Westlaw plan. Again, remember, probably Lexis or Westlaw plans will include the state you're in. So if you're all staying in New York, you'll have New York, okay. But if you have to find out what New Jersey or Connecticut says about a particular issue, these free sources might be good places to get started. Questions about free case resources? Okay, just a couple of more case material type items. Dockets. I don't know how many of you have been involved in any sort of clinic or litigation where you've actually been involved in the filing of pleadings and motions for cases. I know some of you work in a clinic, so you might have done it there. Anybody? Are you familiar with the term docket? Okay, So here's what a docket looks like. This is a federal case, as you'll see. And I go particularly intentionally to Bloomberg because Bloomberg far and away has the best access or the best selection and access to dockets. So if I need a docket, if I need to see case filings, complaints, motions, answers, you name it, Bloomberg's the first place I would go, even though, yes, it's slow, and even though I have to reload it 5 times, because Bloomberg has the database, the federal database that's known as PACER. Anybody have heard of PACER? So PACER is the federal court's version of where all these pleadings happen. These days, many courts require you to electronically file, so they're available on PACER. And yes, we, the law library, have access to PACER, but we basically have one account, and happy to access it for you. But it's a pain, I'll tell you, it's a pain in the neck. It's really old-fashioned, clunky, and just takes a lot of work. Bloomberg, even being so slow and iffy about access with that reload, is still 10 times easier than PACER. And at least for our purposes is free because we have unlimited access to Bloomberg. So while you're here, while you have access to Bloomberg, docket is definitely where you would have Bloomberg has the best advantage. And so you basically see the listing, you see the complaint, and the permission, verified permission, and all the different things that have happened in this particular case. And the beautiful thing about Bloomberg, if you see view, you click on it, and you get the document. There are pleadings on Lexis and Westlaw. I'll go back and show you them briefly, but honestly, I don't even bother because, I mean, if that's all you have, then you go and you use it if you don't have Bloomberg. Even when you see this request, sometimes you just have to click through because we're academics. We can waive the fees, and Bloomberg will actually, I don't know how they do this, but electronically get the document, and you'll get an email like 10 minutes later saying your document has arrived. So it's really very, very nice. The other thing I want to mention about dockets before I forget is I'm hoping you've noticed the library's been providing workshops. I haven't mentioned them so far because they're really duplicative of what we're going over, but Thursday's workshop is not. Thursday's workshop is called The Life Cycle of a Lawsuit, and as you can see, I'm not going into any detail. I never was and probably never, almost certainly never will be a litigator, so there's not much more I can tell you. But I think that Thursday's workshop will be very worthwhile if you are interested in litigation or just want to understand how a lawsuit progresses, and to put my value where my words are. I will be there, and if I see you there, I will check you off, and you'll have an extra get out of jail free for attendance if you need to miss an extra class. So that's your incentive in addition to the knowledge and education that I am certain Thursday's session will provide. It's actually right in this room, coincidentally, at noon on Thursday. So that's my 2-minute commercial for a library workshop looking at pleadings and dockets on Lexis and Westlaw. You can go through the home screen and find it that way. You can also see the filings tab on Westlaw. And yeah, I'm going through this really quickly because, again, I know that it's not nearly as good as Bloomberg. So at least while you're here, that's the place to go. And on Lexis, you'll see, if Lexis has it, you'll see a link, just like Westlaw. You'll see a link here to the side. It doesn't look like this particular case. Has the pleadings, actually, I'm pretty sure Rush did. So let's go. That's 44, and we're already logged out. I'm just a little surprised we don't see the pleadings, but you would see the link pretty straightforward on the right there if we did. Any questions? The other place to find pleadings with regard to state courts, As I said, Bloomberg has all of the federal court PACER. Bloomberg actually does a decent job on state courts too. Not as complete because there's not a unified system the way PACER is for federal, but just going to that state courts. And then it's pretty much hit or miss. You go to the state court website and you just kind of have to follow your nose for court documents and filings. I once had to follow one for an Oklahoma case for one of the faculty in the that particular Oklahoma court. It was a state court, had a great website, and I was able to go back and check on the pleadings. So that is pretty much court specific. But do remember, Google will get you as far as the state court, but I wouldn't be searching for the actual pleading of, or like a complaint in a particular case. I would get to the court's website and then follow the links from there. Last but not least, well, maybe least, with regard to case materials, I mentioned it briefly because I don't know how much you use it, are actually transcripts from court arguments. And of course, the Supreme Court is the highest court in the land and the most famous. So you will find actually the recordings. You will find the oral transcripts on this site called Oyez. You might find some of it on the Supreme Court website. That I'm actually not sure of, but this Oyez site is the most famous one. And you'll also find print transcripts. And it's actually kind of cool to investigate because not only the current Supreme Court cases will you find the recordings, you can find some historic ones, so you can actually hear the argument from Roe v. Wade on this site, and some other famous older Supreme Court cases. And here in New York, we have not quite the equivalent, but we do have oral arguments webcast, as well as the oral argument archive, which is, again includes the print transcripts. And this is for the New York Court of Appeals, so for the highest court in New York. So just be aware it's out there. If that's your thing, or if there's a case of particular interest, you might be able to find those recordings. Any questions? Okay. So now what I would like to do, as I said in the beginning, is to try again with our case finding workshop, but try it a little differently. As I think it was Crystal who I think very observantly pointed out, we did a rather truncated issue spotting. I hadn't anticipated you were running into the problems that we all did, and that made me realize the moral of the story of the difficulties that we ran into last week was don't shortchange the issue spotting. It's probably the most important step in research, because if you don't figure out what you need to research, it doesn't matter how much time and how much you know about every single resource on the planet, you're not going to find what you need. So we're going to try again a different issue, because we've already talked about the attorney malpractice last week. But we're not going to skip on the issue spotting, so I've already laid it out. And the other thing we talked about last time, and Paul rightfully noticed that typically, I think, in law school, maybe not all the time, hopefully not all the time, when you've been presented with a hypothetical or with a client, whomever presents that to you typically gives you the terminology. So you can just sort of jump right in there. And that's great, go with it. But as I suggested last week, you may not, in fact, you almost certainly won't always have someone present you with the right terminology, because they may not know it. They may not know any more about the issue than you do, which is why they're asking you to research it, because they need to know, and the firm organization needs to know so they can move forward and figure out how they're going to best advise the client. So we're going to dive off with an issue, and I am not going to mention the best terms intentionally, so you can assume that at the outset. And we will go through as a group of 21, I think we are, yep. And we will walk through the issue spotting together, and then together we will walk through a little bit of how to then use what we found in the issue spotting to find that one good case. So it'll be a little shorter, a little less in depth than our original workshop, but I think it will show you both the tools and how those tools interact with the absolute necessity of issue spotting. So once again, a client walks through your door, always a good thing. And this client actually is a friend of yours who had a party at her place, and had served beer, wine, a little bit of mixed drinks, good food, and a whole bunch of friends came over, and friends brought friends. You know how parties go. And one of the friends really enjoyed your friend's wine and drove home and got into an accident. Turned out was legally drunk and hurt somebody. The person that was hurt then sued you, or your friend rather, your client, sued your client because your friend, your client, served this person who drove drunk, served the alcohol. Everybody clear on the story? So before we get started, just a few things to clarify that we talked about last week to reiterate and move forward. I'm going to go through and we're going to think of the different terms, and as we then sit down to research, we will try, we want to remember to try the different terms. You don't necessarily have to do them all in one search, especially when we find alternates for expressing a single idea. We also want to think about sort of the different levels of specificity. And by that, I mean, I gave the example last week in our assignment, in our homework hypothetical. There was the very specific polyphenols. The homework assignment client wants to talk about polyphenols. So we talked about, do we want to include that in our research as a term or not? That may be too specific. Then if you sort of move up a slightly less specific, the polyphenols are in what? They're in tea. Do you want to include tea? I think some of you found the word tea actually was kind of useful. You found some stuff, statutes, I think secondary sources that mentioned the word tea. I don't think polyphenols were particularly useful. You don't know in advance. It could be polyphenols are just the biggest legal issue ever. I don't think they are, actually, but you don't know until you try. But you want to think about those alternatives. Moving up from tea, tea is what? Tea is a drink. And drink is part of the larger sort of food and drink area of our lives. So you move up the level of specificity. Likewise, on the legal end of it, the legal theories that we talked about with last week's example with our attorney who did an update. So the legal aspects, of course, update was the most specific, or just a single update we already all agreed on. Updating is what? Updating might have to do with research, or that does have to do with research, and turns out we discovered research was the key word, but we couldn't know that in advance. And as I started to say, I'm sorry, on the legal end, there was malpractice. That turned out to be, that was the most specific I think we thought of, and that turned out to be the best term, the best legal theory. A few of you thought about negligence, which is totally correct, but that was a little too broad. And again, no way of knowing which one till you sort of mix and match and figure out which ones are best. So don't assume you don't use it, but don't also throw in everything under the sun. Because if you throw in too much, then you'll wind up not finding, at once, you'll wind up not finding everything. So you might not want tea and polyphenol and drink and food. You might want to try one at a time or a couple. And the great thing about online searching is you can search and experiment. So back to your friend who had the party. So from a research standpoint, from trying to find out if your friend can be held liable by this person who got hurt, who are we talking about? Now remember, we want to find cases ultimately, because ultimately this is a workshop about cases. So ultimately we're searching court decisions. So what do you think might appear in a court decision? Chelsea? Post? Or post? Yes.
Intoxicated driver.
Anybody else? These are all good. Chelsea?
Server.
Okay, and also when you're doing issue spotting, we're going to be complete, we're going to do it properly, but you don't have to find every possible term that could possibly be used, because you don't want to spend 2 hours issue spotting. You've got other things to do. When you feel like, okay, that's all I can think of for now, I may come up with others, or I may learn others as I start to research, because remember, you want to learn terminology from your research. But when you're good, and I'm not saying to stop here if you do think of others, but it's okay after a couple minutes or to move on. Okay, so what's happened? What might happen to your friend? What does the other person want to do? What happened? What were the facts that caused us to worry about this in the first place? The events. What were the events that caused us to worry about this in the first place? Crystal, Chelsea. Okay. Okay, so we already have accident. And Yana, what? Drunk driving. Driving. Okay. Personal injury. Injury. I know my handwriting is atrocious. If it's something you can't read, just ask. Anything else? Okay. When I didn't tell you, so we're going to say last month. When will typically be an easy question to answer, but you absolutely must ask it because of why? So we're probably going to be in the statute of limitations if it's last month. Where, again, probably a really easy question to answer. I didn't tell you, so since I will tell you now. But if you have a client walking in, you can't assume they're from New York. Maybe the accident happened in New Jersey. We don't, even if your friend is a New York resident, if the accident happened in New Jersey, then we don't quite know. So you want to ask the where question. Why? We might have already answered. Anybody think of another why? Why is this happening to your friend? Why do we care? Why could your friend be held liable? Why is the person suing or thinking about suing your friend? Why is your friend in your office? And you're allowed to say, I already answered that somewhere else. And as I said, when we did the first issue spotting, it doesn't really matter what column you put in the concepts as long as you get the important concepts. So do we think was there a sheet?
The host has a duty.
I'm never really sure as how applies. I put it up there just if it helps us think of something. Once we've gone through the questions, the next step is, okay, so we have our circumstances. Is there anything not represented here? Is there any key concept not represented here? Forget about what column it fits in. I'll just throw it on the board. Is there any important concept? Chelsea? Yeah, I would say we've got drunk driving, but it doesn't hurt to alcohol. Anybody else? I would say there's one that arguably is or isn't important. We don't know yet. That's why we're doing the research. Maybe imputing liability. Imputing liability. We're getting into some legal theories. That's fine. That's what this is all about. Let's get those ideas out there. Brainstorming, I guess is the term.
I don't know if it applies like dram shop, if it's like if it was in a bar or at a social place.
Bar, social, and what, pray tell, is dram shop? Anybody not here of dram shop? You all know what dram shop is? No? Okay, I've got one brave person. Can you explain to us what dram shop is?
Well, it's like premise of liability against, like, say if someone goes to the bar, gets served, cuts them off, and then they go after them. And they can be liable.
Bar, I'm just reordering the words you said. If you disagree with my interpretation, by all means. That sound about right. Dram shop is liability of bar for drunk driving.
I just have a question about the background. Did you say it was at the host's house or was it at a bar?
No, it was at your friend's apartment. Since we're not sure whether he was a homeowner or not, but we'll say apartment. Any other key concepts? Legal theories? Chelsea? Negligence? And again, at this point, I don't have anything in the right column. When you're doing this on paper, if it makes you feel better, put it in legal theories column. For me, a brainstorming exercise, as long as I have the concepts, but you all don't work the same, so we have, I'm just repeating, there's one concept, again, I'm not saying it is or isn't important, but it's just one part of the fact pattern. Shane touched on it when he talked about whether or not dram shop applies for a bar, but of course we're not at a bar. Allie mentioned homeowner, apartment owner, what was going on that caused the alcohol to be served. Part. Again, may or may not, imputed, you all know my abbreviation, imputed liability, legal theory, dram shop, question mark, because we're not a bar. We will say party. Maybe underwent, again, it doesn't, the columns don't really matter. Personal injury. Pardon me? Private. Private, we could private, that's certainly aware. Which may or may not be relevant, depending on when dram shop is relevant. Okay. Now comes, that was the fun part. Now comes the challenging part. Obviously, we're not going to do a search with all of these words. It would take us half an hour just to type them all. At least it would take me half an hour to type them all. So the challenging part is, where do we start? What are the most promising? And one piece of guidance I will give you is, don't start too complex. We've talked about all these great tools with /s's and /p's and all the different possible, got a whole lot of terms up there. We haven't even talked about synonyms for these words. We'll think about that as we're typing, or maybe we don't think about that until we get our results. If our results don't pull up something good, we have to keep that in the back of our head. But the important part and the challenging part is figuring out what we think is important. And it's a guess, because just like the person who might be assigning this, you don't know the answer either, right? You don't know which of this. But based on my story, in fact, it's your second and third year law students, so you talked about negligence and other legal issues. What would be your top, I don't know, let's say, top 4 or 5, we don't have to be a specific number, and we may even want to whittle it down from So we're going to put finger to keyboard soon. And as I'm sure you will all want to do first, which as I have said many times is totally fine as long as you don't stop there, and that is to start with Google, and just good old regular Google. We'll worry about cases in a little bit. What are we going to type? What are we going to put finger to keyboard? What are we typing into Google? Matt, sorry.
Could you put like host guest party from driving?
Anybody? Chelsea, then Danielle?
Dram shop liability for house party.
Okay, so we don't want to do them all at once. So, dram shop liability for house party, and Danielle.
I did in social host liability from driving.
Social host liability.
Yeah, I guess it was not a word.
So, where?
So maybe social host.
So a new term. Here it is. It flew all the way over here, Mike. Okay, so let's do this. Let's start with Matt, Chelsea, and then Danielle, and we'll see the top few results because nobody looks much beyond the first three of Google. Anyway, not that I'm saying that's a good thing. I was talking to somebody, and they actually were patient, went to the second page of Google, forget about the top three, and found their answer. So just as that, but I'm as bad as anybody. So how about that? This Matt's terms, social host liability, find one. So first of all, a site that we know is a decent legal site, right? It's not not that law firm sites are bad, but law firm sites we're just going to learn from, we're not going to rely on. Find law, we know when your guests drink, then drive, criminal law. So social host alcohol liability, lawyers.com. I don't know lawyers.com, honestly, so I don't know if it's an advertising. So I'll look at it, I'll see what I can learn from it, but I'm not going to rely on it. So this one, our results kind of incorporate what Danielle was talking about. So social host liability and common law. Common law holds social hosts are not liable for injuries or death related to alcohol served to guests. So here's an example, even without, although Danielle had the term social host, we've learned, looks like social host is a term, a term of art. Adult responsibility, underage, not really. State social host law, so you gotta love find law. So again, why it's good to know about some of these portals, even if you don't go to them and use them, you know you can look at them when you get Google result. So, okay, let's see quickly, because we kind of did Matt and Danielle's search, sort of, because it came up. Chelsea, what was your terminology again? I'm sorry. I think it was party, yes.
Dram shop.
Oh, dram shop. There you go. Dram shop. Party or... That's kind of interesting because it uses some of the other terms we did in that whole dram shop that we're not sure if it applies or doesn't apply. So, hey, we're on Google. It's free. It takes a minute. It's worth trying out a couple. See if we get the same. See if we get different. See if we learn something new. Again, we're talking about not even 5 minutes. Again, we get the same find law, so you start to see the same thing. And we've already looked at it and know that it's good. So, a couple of others. Nolo. Anybody hear of Nolo Publishing? Oh, what do you know about Nolo Publishing?
No, I've just been on the website a few times.
Okay. Actually, a good Nolo publisher prides itself on publishing legal guides for non-lawyers. They used to have a symbol, and I hope you don't get offended. I always thought it was kind of funny. But their symbol always was a shark with a tie. There was a time when lawyers were sometimes referred to as sharks, not you guys, of course, but other less friendly, scrupulous lawyers. And so it's always kind of funny, because again, their market niche is writing legal guides for non-lawyers. But even though we're lawyers, it's still kind of useful because they're still going to tell us what the law is. And so here, this is Minnesota, which isn't useful for us, although still would be worth looking at for terminology purposes, right? So even when you see something from a totally different state and you know you want your state, it's still worth looking at if it's on point to see what you can learn. But it's known as dram shop because vendors traditionally sold alcohol by a unit of measure called a dram. I never knew that. See? Learned something. Not useful for legal research, but interesting, I think, nonetheless. Okay, so we now have a background. Now let's go back to Westlaw. We're in New York. I'm already limited to New York here. So what would you say were the best terms we've come up with so far, sort of combining the three searches, because we kind of did pretty well with all of them. So let's go with the best of three good alternatives. Host, liability, and dram shop. Doing natural language, so we don't need the and. I will put it in, but my thought process would be that's kind of in the dram shop. That's what dram shop is liability. Again, you don't want to start putting in too many words, because even though this is natural, quote-unquote, plain language, you start to throw in too many words, and Westlaw's going to try to find all those words one way or the other. And again, it's a balance. I mean, look at just typing in, we found secondary sources, dram shop and social host liability. So we wanted to do some more background rating, tort, that sounds like litigation tort treatise, right? Social host liability general, New Jersey practice. Now, of course, even though we're limited to New York, Westlaw's just pulling up secondary sources that seem to, and the secondary source would be a good way to go. Absolutely. I'm not sure I would go to the New Jersey one, only because we want New York, right? If we don't find anything in New York, I may then broaden my scope. But part of this exercise issue spotting, and part of it is case finding. So I think we've done a good job on the issue spotting. One thing I will detour for just a minute is going back to our exercise last week, which still is totally fascinating to me because it is a great real-life example of when you're going to run into problems with issue spotting, with research, are going to be with issues that don't have these wonderful terms of art. So we discovered social host, even drunk driving, even alcohol. We were talking about attorneys and malpractice, which could be negligence. And of course, we were talking about research, which is pretty well defined, but it's certainly not a term of art. Some of you use the term supersedure, which is totally legitimate for the facts that we talked about in terms of cases being superseded. You were getting kind of fancy there, given your knowledge, but you were totally correct. So in that circumstance, had we done the proper issue spotting last week, I'm still not entirely sure we would have, without me guiding you, which of course isn't fair because if you don't know the answer, you're not going to have somebody guiding you. Still not entirely sure you would get to research. You would get to those key terms, to the malpractice, to the research. And that's where we didn't really have to do it in this exercise because you guys were more knowledgeable. So you've used your law school experience well thus far, but that's where the sort of moving up and down the scale of specificity from the updating to supersedure, what really is that part of that's research, likewise negligence, malpractice. I think somebody mentioned torts, which you'd be absolutely correct. So you want to keep that in your mind if your original Google searches weren't as great as ours were, to keep those tools in mind. So let's move on to how to use the Westlaw case finding. And then briefly, Lexis. I'm not fighting with Bloomberg, and they don't have anything great either. So we pulled up a case. We see Dram Shop Act, liability, at least. So here we see mention of Dram Shop, social host. So once I've done my issue spotting, I'm feeling good about the terms. I'm going to look at the cases, and I'm going to see if I can find one good case. This one mentions our terms. And as I suggested, next step is to see if we can find topic and key number. And that, of course, we do in the head notes. And remember, you always have to have those two parts on Westlaw, the address, the street number, and the street name. So we've got topic and key number. So here we see our topic, intoxicating liquors, right? That sounds going to be relevant. Civil damages, persons liable in general. So does that one sound promising? Okay, so we're going to remember intoxicating liquors, which is topic number 223, and persons liable is key number 298, and in general, I would always look in general. It's such a stupid name. Sorry for lack of better term for that. It's useless. That's better. So excuse me. It's such a useless name, but you kind of do have to look. Okay, so there's only one head note in this. So hence only one topic and key number in this particular case. But definitely going to use that. So what I want to do now, I could click on that and I could get more head notes. Actually, why don't I do that rather than just talk about it? So again, this is a quick review. I could click on either of these. I could go to the broader topic here. I'm going to go to persons liable. I would actually just do both. Honestly, do one and do the other. And so here are other cases that use that topic and key number. Since we already started in New York, we don't have to change our jurisdiction, but when you're using the head notes, you always must check. Remember when we used Aetna, we wound up in the Supreme Court. We certainly don't want to limit our cases to Supreme Court. So this would be one way to find other cases. What I started to do, so now back in our search results, if I want to find of my search results, I want to use our topic and key number. This is so not a trick question. It's almost pointless, but what filter am I going to use? Key number. I told you, not a trick question. I don't do trick questions until the last class. In the last class, I will do trick questions. I will warn you again when we do the last class. But until then, no trick questions. We've got no trick questions till the end of April. So key number. And just as a quick review, so here's a listing of the key numbers, all of the topics and key numbers from our search results. We already know we like intoxicating liquors. And what's nice about this key number filter is I can just do the heading, or if you remember, this is our heading from our case. I can see, it's interesting, it says expand, and this is where the key number system's a little misleading. Even though it just says 298, by telling me to expand, it tells me there's more there. So I could do in general, and that's joint owners or lessors of premises. So I can add that. So basically, where you see something that looks good, add it or expand it, or both, which is essentially what I'm doing. And go through, and there's no magic here. What looks good to me may or may not be good. I can click on Continue. And then click on Apply Filters. I could search within results, so if I wanted to search, I want to make sure I like that social host term. Again, I'm just giving you examples of, and then I always do that. Have to click on Apply Filters. And so here are cases narrowed down. Now what I might want to do is look at some of the other cases. We looked at that second case. See, are there other head notes that maybe I want to use? Another tool is to look at that all-important table of contents. And you can do that any number of ways. If you remember intoxicating liquors, you can go back to the first screen. I can also shortcut it. I'll do it both ways. I can shortcut it this way by clicking on it and then remembering there's a breadcrumb trail kind of hidden up here. So you have to remember it's hidden up there. Guys, I don't want to... There we go. And there's that table of contents. And see if there are others, grounds for action. Injuries to person, to property in general. Again, not my favorite topic name, but I'm going to look at it. Person's entitled to sue. We're more interested in person's liable. The other way, as I mentioned, to get to this, it's not quite as direct, but if you don't remember that little breadcrumb trail, you can always get to the key number table of contents from the front screen of Westlaw. And then you have to remember your topic, which we already know is intoxicating liquors. And I have to go a little further down. And depending on what the topic is, I may want to investigate more of the hierarchy, or maybe I determine it's not relevant, but it's worth looking at again for just a couple of minutes. Since we already have a reference, I know that 298, 299 is relevant, so I might start there. We already knew that civil damage laws was our subheading of interest. See what else is here. So again, you can use that breadcrumb trail at the top when you click on the head note, or just go to the front page, which honestly is what I do a lot of the time. So I just find it easier. Okay, so that's using the head notes within a search. Anybody remember another advanced tool? Oops, see, I told you I was going to make that mistake. On Westlaw, you want to narrow to your content type before going to advanced. So narrowing to cases, then going to advanced. Anybody remember another advanced tool we talked about? Synopsis and digest. If you don't want to get into the whole topic number, key number, this is a nice shortcut to do a keyword search, but to narrow it to that area of the case that talks about what the case is about. So if we wanted to see where social host and dram shop is mentioned, and notice Westlaw populates our advanced search right up here. We're already in cases. Dive in here so you can see where our results are. Westlaw is making a recommendation based on your current research. So I might take a look at their recommendation. So our synopsis digest is the summary, the synopsis. And the digest is actually all this head note key number stuff. And it's just taking me a while to get down to, so you can see dram shop, scroll past. Social host, not surprising, topic intoxicating liquors, which we've already learned. Aha, at long last we get a reference to the actual statute section. We don't know it's the actual statute section yet. So that Synopsis Digest we talked about. One other advanced. If I wanted a case that judicially defined a term, do you remember what I would search? We looked in the books in the very first class, and we looked in Westlaw last time. In the advanced search, words and phrases. So again, sometimes words are so important. So if we wanted to define a case that defined dram shop, I know we're getting off of our hypothetical here, but again, just to review, I know this isn't exactly a workshop, but hopefully you'll bear with me. So again, here's different cases that judicially define dram shop in New York, because again, I'm limited to New York. And switching very briefly to Lexis, stick natural language, and basically where I'm going with this in Lexis is just to review Lexis headnotes, which we kind of talked about with Shepard's. But again, you can use the headnotes. Oh, look. Negligence action, alcohol providers, general overview. So again, just using that one good case. So we found our good terminology by doing our issue spotting, doing some initial Google searching. If Lexis is the only service available to us, which is totally good. I know a lot of you actually really like Lexis. Do our search, go into a case. Here's a head note. Negligence actions, alcohol providers, general overview. I want to look a little more carefully at the case, although it's mentioning our terms. So we have our one good case, and then using the topical resources, the topical tools in our toolbox on Lexis. And again, we've already talked about using Shepard's to find more good cases, more recent good cases. Any questions? Was that useful? And if you're not so sure, then that's good to know too. I have certainly learned my lesson. I will never shortchange issue spotting when I give you a hypothetical again. I hope you have learned the same lesson. Okay, let's take a break. Let's come back at 5:06 and we will talk about form finding.